Every civilization begins with the same confidence. This time, it will be different. Different technology, different intelligence, different safeguards, different money. For a while, that belief feels justified. Systems grow, trade expands, wealth multiplies. The machinery of civilization hums along smoothly enough that people forget what money is actually supposed to do. They stop asking whether it can survive stress. They assume it will. And then, eventually, stress arrives. Wars don't announce themselves politely. Debt doesn't ask permission. Political pressure doesn't wait for consensus. When reality applies force, monetary systems reveal their true nature. Paper burns, ledgers are rewritten, digital balances vanish behind frozen screens and locked accounts. Yet, when the dust settles, every time, one object quietly returns. Not because people love it, not because tradition demands it, not because anyone voted for it. Gold survives because everything else fails first. That is the part most explanations get wrong. Gold did not become money because humans decided it should. Humans ended up with gold because the universe left them very few alternatives. We like to say money is a social construct, a shared belief, a collective agreement that works because everyone accepts it. That idea feels empowering. It suggests control. But belief alone has never survived collapse. If belief were enough, seashells would still be money. If belief were enough, paper promises would never die. If belief were enough, no currency in history would have failed. They all did. Gold didn't survive because people trusted it. Gold survived because it didn't need trust. To understand why, you have to strip money down to its most brutal requirement. Not usefulness, not beauty, not efficiency, survivability. Imagine civilization resetting tomorrow. No governments, no courts, no banks, no electricity, just people rebuilding from nothing. Or imagine something even more distant, humans encountering an intelligent civilization elsewhere in the universe, different biology, different language, no shared history. If trade emerges, if scarcity exists, if time matters, their money would not look arbitrary. It would converge, not culturally, but physically, because the universe enforces constraints, whether we like them or not. There are 118 known elements. If you want something to function as money across time, chaos, and human failure, you don't get infinite choice. You eliminate what fails. Start with gases. They escape, they disperse, they cannot be contained. A currency that disappears when you open your hand is not money, it is air. Liquids fail next. They spill, they evaporate, they contaminate. Some poison you, some corrode what they touch. A store of value that leaks, rots containers, or kills its owner doesn't last long. Then come the reactive solids. Elements that look promising until they meet oxygen, moisture, or time. They rust, they burn, they crumble. Some explode violently under common conditions. A currency that degrades simply by existing in the real world doesn't survive first contact with reality. Radioactive elements fail even faster. Money that slowly destroys the body of its holder never becomes widely adopted. Nature doesn't negotiate on this point. After removing everything that floats away, spills, ignites, corrodes, rusts, or irradiates, the list becomes very short, painfully short. Now another filter applies: scarcity. If something is everywhere, it cannot store value. If anyone can gather it effortlessly, it becomes background noise, not money. And even among scarce materials, most still fail. Some are too soft, some are too brittle, some degrade slowly over time, some require extreme technology to work with. A monetary base must survive not just years, but centuries. It must pass through floods, fires, wars, neglect, burial, and rediscovery without losing its identity. This is where gold becomes unsettling. Gold does not react. It does not rust. It does not corrode. It does not decay. You can bury it in mud, sink it in seawater, heat it, crush it, melt it down, and reshape it endlessly. Time barely touches it. Gold is not just resistant to decay, it is almost indifferent to entropy. That single property quietly eliminates nearly every alternative humans have ever tried. Because monetary systems don't fail gracefully, they fail violently. Under pressure, rules are rewritten, promises are broken, laws are suspended. Institutions that seemed permanent reveal how temporary they always were. Most forms of money are promises. A promise that a government will honor it, a promise that a bank will redeem it, a promise that a network will remain online. Promises work until they don't. Gold is not a promise. It does not require enforcement. It does not require belief. It does not require continuity. It simply exists. That is why gold becomes valuable precisely when trust disappears. But physics alone does not explain why gold resists manipulation. Durability explains survival. It does not explain control. To understand why gold cannot be easily bent to political will, you have to move from atoms to arithmetic. Because there's a second force, quieter than physics, but just as unforgiving, that determines whether money can be abused. Math does not respond to speeches. It does not compromise. It does not care about intentions. And gold's relationship with math is what makes it uniquely dangerous to every monetary authority that has ever existed. Before we go there, pause. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. If gold is so outdated, so primitive, so inefficient, why do the most powerful institutions on earth still keep it locked away? Why, in an age of digital currencies, instant settlement, and algorithmic money, does this ancient metal still sit silently at the core of the system, not advertised, not discussed, but never removed? Power does not fear what it can control. It fears what it cannot dilute. And gold's true threat has nothing to do with history, nostalgia, or tradition. It has to do with limits, limits that cannot be negotiated away. To see that clearly, ideology has to be stripped out completely. No politics, no moral arguments, no opinions, just numbers. Because once you understand the math behind gold, you begin to see why every monetary system eventually collides with the same problem, and why gold is always waiting on the other side of that collision. Physics explains why gold survives time. Math explains why gold survives power. Durability keeps something alive. Scarcity determines who controls it. And this is where nearly every monetary system quietly fails. There is a simple concept that decides the fate of money long before politics, ideology, or policy ever enter the picture. It is not complicated, it is not theoretical, and it does not care who is in charge. It is called the stock-to-flow ratio. The stock is everything that already exists. The flow is how much new supply is added each year. Divide the stock by the flow, and you get a number that tells you how long it would take to double the supply. That number is not just a statistic, it is a constraint. For most things humans value, that constraint is weak. Take wheat. If prices rise, farmers plant more. Supply increases, prices fall. Take oil. If prices spike, drilling expands. New supply floods the market. Take copper. Higher prices mean more mines, more output, more dilution. This elasticity is useful for commodities. It is lethal for money. Because money is not supposed to respond to incentives. It is supposed to resist them. A monetary base that expands easily will always expand eventually. Not because leaders are evil, but because pressure makes expansion irresistible. Gold behaves differently. Because gold is not consumed, destroyed, or degraded, almost every ounce ever mined still exists today. Not in theory,
physically. It sits in vaults. It sits in jewelry. It sits in museums. It sits forgotten underground, waiting to be rediscovered. All of it still counts. That creates an enormous stock. And now look at the flow. Each year, global mining adds only a tiny fraction to the existing supply. Even with modern technology, the annual increase barely moves the total. This creates one of the highest stock-to-flow ratios of any physical asset humans have ever used. And that ratio produces a strange effect, one that politicians, central planners, and empires have struggled with for thousands of years. Gold cannot be printed. Even if the price explodes, miners cannot double supply. They cannot triple it. They cannot respond fast enough to matter. They can work harder, dig deeper, spend more capital, and still barely scratch the surface. Gold's scarcity is not enforced by law. It is enforced by reality. This is the part most people misunderstand. Gold is not scarce because humans decided it should be. It is scarce because the earth refuses to give up more of it. Now compare that to modern currency. Fiat money has no stock-to-flow constraint. Its flow is whatever authorities decide it should be. There is no mine, no furnace, no physical limit, only keystrokes and balance sheets. When pressure rises, the choice is always the same. Raise taxes and face revolt, cut spending and face collapse, or expand the money supply quietly. History shows which option is chosen, not because leaders are foolish, not because citizens are ignorant, but because the incentives are overwhelming. Expansion feels painless at first. Debts are easier to service, markets stabilized.
Crises appear contained. The cost is hidden, spread across time, diluted across millions, blamed on everything except the source. Gold does not cooperate with this process. It does not respond to incentives. It does not expand on command. It does not care about emergencies, and that makes it a problem. Throughout history, authorities have tried to escape this constraint in the same sequence. First, they clip coins. Then they debase alloys. Then they replace paper with promises. Then they replace promises with promises. Then they replace promises with digits. Each step makes money easier to produce. Each step increases flexibility. And each step makes gold more dangerous, because gold exposes the comparison. When the money supply expands faster than gold, currencies do not lose value against prices. They lose value against scarcity itself. This is why gold is often accused of being volatile. It isn't. Currencies are. Gold does not rise dramatically. The measuring stick stays still while everything else moves. That is why gold becomes visible during crises, not because it changes, but because everything else does. This creates a psychological illusion that confuses people. They think gold is reacting. In reality, it is revealing. It reveals discipline when discipline exists, and it reveals decay when decay sets in. This is why gold feels boring in stable periods. It does nothing, it yields nothing, it demands nothing, and so it is ignored. But when systems stretch beyond their limits, when debt accumulates faster than trust, gold begins to look expensive, not because it changed, but because promises did. This is why monetary authorities have always had an uneasy relationship with gold. Gold enforces honesty. It tells you exactly how much dilution has occurred, without speeches, without explanations, without spin. That is intolerable in a system built on discretion. Discretion means flexibility. Flexibility means control. Control requires silence.
Gold is loud. It speaks in numbers no one can override. And this leads to an uncomfortable truth. The reason gold survives every monetary system is not because it is old. It is because every system eventually tries to escape its own limits, and gold refuses to go along. But math alone does not explain gold's final role. Durability explains survival. Scarcity explains resistance. But there is one more layer, deeper and more unsettling, that explains why gold becomes dominant precisely when systems fracture. To understand that, you have to stop thinking about money as a market and start thinking about it as architecture. Because when systems collapse, they don't collapse evenly, they collapse downward. Math explains why gold resists dilution, but it does not explain what happens when systems begin to fail. Because failure is not just about numbers, it is about structure. Most people imagine the financial system as a flat landscape, markets rising and falling, assets moving side to side, money flowing freely between them. That picture is comforting. It is also wrong. The financial system is not flat. It is vertical. And when stress enters the system, gravity takes over.
To understand gold's role, you have to see the system the way it actually functions, not as a network, but as a hierarchy. Imagine an upside-down pyramid. At the very top, wide, massive, and unstable, sit the most complex financial instruments: derivatives, leverage, bets stacked on bets, enormous in scale, fragile by design. Below that are stocks and real estate, claims on future earnings, ownership, but only as long as companies function and legal systems enforce contracts. Below that are bonds, debt instruments, promises made by governments and institutions backed by future taxation and political stability. Below that is cash, official money, legal tender, accepted because the state says it must be. And at the very bottom, at the narrow point supporting the entire structure, sits something small, dense, and silent: gold. This is not a metaphor. It is how capital actually behaves under stress. In calm periods, money flows upward. People feel safe, confident, optimistic. They sell stability to chase returns. They move from gold to cash, from cash to bonds, from bonds to stocks, from stocks to leverage. The pyramid grows taller, wider, more unstable. This expansion feels like progress until something breaks. When stress enters the system, war, recession, banking failure, political crisis, the flow reverses. Suddenly everyone wants out at the same time. Risk is no longer attractive. Safety becomes urgent. Stocks are sold to buy bonds. Bonds are sold to raise cash. And then comes the realization most people never anticipate. Cash is not the bottom. Cash is a liability. It is a promise issued by an institution, and promises fail under enough pressure. This is where the concept of counterparty risk becomes unavoidable. A stock depends on a company remaining solvent. A bond depends on a government remaining functional. A bank balance depends on a bank remaining liquid. A currency depends on political discipline and trust. Every one of these requires someone else to perform. Gold does not. Gold has no counterparty. It does not rely on repayment. It does not require enforcement. It does not depend on confidence. It exists outside the pyramid. And that is why when panic becomes absolute, capital flows to the bottom, past cash, past promises, to the only asset that cannot default. This is not theory. It is observable behavior. Every financial crisis follows the same pattern. At first, authorities insist everything is contained. Then they inject liquidity. Then they expand guarantees. Then they change rules. And each step quietly increases risk at the lower layers, until people realize that safety is no longer where they thought it was.
That realization is when gold stops being mocked, not because it suddenly became useful, but because everything else revealed what it truly was: claims, permissions, IOUs. This is why gold is often described as outside money, not because it lives outside markets, but because it lives outside permission. It cannot be frozen by policy. It cannot be canceled by software. It cannot be diluted by decree. And this creates a problem.
Because if gold is the final escape hatch, what happens when too many people try to escape at once? That question has been answered before, and the answer is never pleasant. History shows a consistent pattern. Gold is tolerated in stable times, discouraged in uncertain times, restricted in crisis, and seized when desperation peaks. Not because gold fails, but because it works too well. Gold does not just protect individuals, it exposes systems. When trust is strong, gold looks obsolete. When trust erodes, gold looks threatening. Because a rising gold price is not a market signal, it is a confidence signal. It tells the public that discipline is gone, that promises are being questioned, that control is slipping. For systems built on belief, that signal is dangerous. So the narrative changes. Gold is no longer stability, it is hoarding. No longer insurance, it is selfishness. No longer neutral, it is subversive. The public is told extraordinary times require extraordinary measures, and then almost overnight, the rules change. Ownership becomes conditional. Access becomes restricted. Compliance becomes mandatory. Not because gold caused the crisis, but because it revealed it. This is the part most people never think through. They assume the risk of gold lies in its price. History suggests the greater risk lies in its independence. Gold is tolerated only as long as it does not threaten the structure above it. When enough people move downward at the same time, the pyramid cannot support itself, and power reacts the only way it knows how, by closing exits. This is why gold's role has always been misunderstood. People think it is about returns. It is not. It is about settlement. In a system built entirely on debt, there must be something at the bottom that is not debt. Gold occupies that position not by design, but by elimination. Nothing else survives long enough. And that reality creates a permanent tension. Because systems want flexibility, gold enforces limits, and limits are intolerable when promises outgrow reality. Which brings us to the moment where theory becomes history. Because this pattern did not remain abstract, it played out publicly, legally, forcefully, and the consequences still shape the monetary world today. To understand how far systems will go to preserve themselves, you have to look at the moment when gold stopped being an option and became a target. Every system insists it is stable, right up until it isn't. And when instability becomes impossible to deny, systems don't collapse politely, they protect themselves. That is the part of monetary history most people are never taught. We are taught about innovation, about progress, about evolution. What we are rarely taught is what happens when control is threatened. Because when an escape exists, when people can step outside a failing system, power eventually tries to close it. Gold has always been that escape, and history shows that when enough people begin moving toward it, the response is not debate, it is force. By the early 20th century, governments faced a problem no previous era had encountered at scale. Industrial warfare, mass mobilization, exploding public debt, populations demanding security without sacrifice. The old monetary discipline could not survive this pressure. Gold limited spending, gold limited borrowing, gold limited promises, and limits are intolerable in a crisis. So the story changed. Gold was no longer stability,
It became obstruction. No longer safety, it became hoarding. No longer freedom, it became unpatriotic. Citizens were told that extraordinary times required extraordinary measures, that cooperation was necessary, that sacrifice was temporary. And then the rules changed. Ownership became illegal. People were ordered to surrender their gold, coins, bars, certificates. Family savings passed down through generations were suddenly reframed as threats to national stability. Refusal was not symbolic, it carried real consequences: fines, prison sentences, confiscation. And here's the part that still unsettles economists. It worked. Not because people were stupid, not because they were evil, but because the system had trained them to trust authority more than permanence. Gold flowed into government vaults, currency was devalued, debt became manageable again, on paper. But something fundamental changed. Money stopped being something you owned, it became something you were allowed to use. From that moment forward, currency was no longer neutral. It became a policy tool, adjustable, expandable, political. Gold had not failed, it had succeeded too well, and that success made it dangerous. This is the pattern that repeats throughout history. Gold is ignored when it is quiet, mocked when it is stable, criticized when it rises, and restricted when it threatens confidence, not because it causes collapse, but because it reveals it. Fast forward to the modern era. The system looks more advanced, more sophisticated, more efficient. Money moves instantly, ledgers are digital, transactions settle across borders in seconds. But this speed comes with fragility. Everything depends on permission: bank access, payment rails, clearing systems, reserve accounts. Ownership now exists inside frameworks controlled by institutions, and when trust fractures between nations, that permission can be revoked, not hypothetically, in reality. In recent years, governments learned a brutal lesson about modern money. They discovered that reserves held in foreign currencies are not truly reserves, they are claims, and claims can be frozen, turned off, locked out, rendered unusable overnight. The numbers still exist on a screen, but functionally they are gone. That moment sent a shock through the global system because it revealed something most people had never considered. Some money is neutral, some money is political, and political money obeys power. This is why institutions that publicly dismiss gold never stop accumulating it. They understand something the public is rarely told. In a system built on debt, the final settlement layer must be something that is not debt. Gold is not held to make returns, it is held to survive failure. But this creates an uncomfortable tension. If gold is the ultimate escape hatch, and if authorities know this, then gold ownership is tolerated only as long as it does not threaten the structure above it. Gold is allowed in calm times. It becomes controversial in uncertain times, and it becomes dangerous in desperate times. This does not mean gold disappears. History shows something more subtle. Access disappears. Rules change. Definitions shift. Exceptions multiply. What was once ownership becomes conditional. And this is the psychological trap. Most people assume risk comes from markets, volatility, price swings, timing mistakes. History suggests the greater risk comes from control. Who decides what money is? Who decides what ownership means? Who decides when rules no longer apply? Gold answers those questions in a way power does not like. Because gold does not ask for permission to exist. It does not comply. It does not negotiate. It does not adapt to narratives. It simply waits. And that waiting is what makes it both eternal and threatening. This is why gold's role is always misunderstood. People argue about whether it is outdated, whether it yields enough, whether it belongs in a modern portfolio. Those debates miss the point entirely. Gold is not about performance, it is about optionality, the ability to step outside a failing system quietly, legally, and early. Gold is not a bet against progress, it is insurance against denial. It sits patiently while confidence rises. It waits silently while debt accumulates. And when systems finally admit what they have become, gold does not rush in. It is already there. Which brings us to the final realization, one most people avoid. Gold does not protect everyone equally. It never has. By the time gold becomes obvious, it is already controversial. By the time it is controversial, it is already restricted. And by the time it is restricted, it is already too late for most. This is the rhythm history keeps repeating, not because gold changes, but because human behavior doesn't. There is a mistake people make when they talk about gold. They think it is trying to predict collapse. It isn't. Gold doesn't forecast the future. It doesn't warn politely. It doesn't ring alarms. Gold simply keeps score. It measures time, not calendar time, but economic time, not innovation, but discipline, not progress, but restraint. When currencies lose purchasing power, gold does not go up. It stays where it is. Everything else moves beneath it. This is why arguments about whether gold is outdated always miss the point. Gold is not competing with technology. It is not competing with productivity. It is not competing with growth. Gold is competing with human behavior, and human behavior has not improved. The same cycle repeats because the same incentives repeat. Confidence leads to expansion. Expansion leads to excess. Excess leads to pressure. Pressure leads to shortcuts. Every monetary system begins with restraint. Rules are followed. Limits are respected. Promises are realistic. And then success creates temptation. Debt becomes easier than discipline. Printing becomes easier than pain. Blame becomes easier than responsibility. This is not a moral failure. It is a structural one. Systems built by humans inherit human weaknesses. Gold exists to reveal that weakness. That is why it is mocked in good times. It does nothing. It yields nothing. It demands nothing. It sits silently while confidence grows. But when confidence breaks, when trust evaporates, gold does not need to change. The system does. And that is why gold becomes uncomfortable, because it refuses to lie. Gold does not care about speeches. It does not respond to policy. It does not adjust for political necessity. It simply reflects what already happened. This is why debates about whether gold belongs in the future are misguided. Gold has never belonged to the future. It belongs to reality. Every monetary experiment eventually makes the same promise. Trust us. Trust our discipline. Trust that we won't take the easy path when pressure mounts. And every time, under enough stress, that promise breaks. Not because leaders are uniquely corrupt, not because citizens are foolish, but because incentives overwhelm restraint. When debt grows too large, the honest path is painful. Defaults, cuts, admitting limits. The dishonest path is easier. Debase quietly, print invisibly, blame inflation on everything except the source. Gold exists to record which path was chosen. That is why it is hated when it rises. A rising gold price is not optimism. It is a verdict. It says something broke, and that verdict makes people uncomfortable, especially those in control. Because gold does not just protect individuals, it exposes systems. It reveals when money stops being a neutral tool and becomes a political instrument. It reveals when ownership becomes permission. It reveals when rules apply only until they don't. That is why gold is called outside money, not because it lives outside markets, but because it lives outside permission. Every other form of modern money exists inside a framework. Accounts can be frozen, transactions can be reversed, access can be revoked. Gold cannot be edited. And that single fact ensures it will never disappear, no matter how advanced systems become. But here is the final uncomfortable realization. Gold does not protect everyone. It never has. Gold protects those who understand when it matters. History shows a brutal pattern. By the time gold becomes obvious, it is already controversial. By the time it is controversial, it is already restricted. And by the time it is restricted, it is already too late for most. This is why gold's role is always misunderstood. People think it is about profit. It is not. It is about optionality, the ability to step outside a failing system quietly, legally, and early. Gold is not a bet against progress. It is insurance against denial. It waits while confidence rises. It waits while debt accumulates. It waits while promises multiply. And when the system finally admits what it has become, gold does not rush in. It is already there. That is why every civilization eventually rediscovers it, why every monetary experiment eventually circles back to it, why every collapse ends the same way, not with innovation, with reckoning. Gold does not save systems, it outlives them. And that is the hidden reason it has survived kings, empires, ideologies, and currencies, while each insisted it was permanent. So the question is no longer whether gold will survive the next monetary system. It will. The real question is simpler and far more personal. Will you understand why before the system reminds you?